these people that are sitting with literally thousands of unexploded ordnance in piles of rubble. At some point, we have to look realistically. How do you rebuild Gaza?
Ultimately, restoring trust in our public health institution is too important. And I think Mr. Kennedy can help get that done.
It's flabbergasting to me that she couldn't even bring herself to call Edward Snowden a traitor.
Hello, everyone. I'm Major Garrett in Washington. Tonight on America Decides Middle East Talks, we are waiting to hear from President Trump and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Both are expected to address reporters this hour at the White House. We'll take you to the White House when that happens, and this might be more information than you're interested in. We have a full show planned for tonight. The White House, according to the schedule we were given this morning, is running at least a half an hour behind schedule. We were tracking this at 5:10 Eastern. So at some point in this hour, we anticipate that press conference. When it happens, we will take you there. In the meantime, we are, of course, tracking several other big stories right here in the nation's capital. The FBI deadline, well, it's been reached, as the names of some 5,000 employees who worked on January 6th and related cases, those names have been handed over to the Justice Department. FBI agents have subsequently filed a lawsuit in response. And moving forward, votes along party lines in two separate committees move Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and Tulsi Gabbard closer to final Senate confirmation votes. Plus, China answers back. Beijing has responded to President Trump's tariffs on Chinese imports. In return, China has said the United States and its exporters will face new taxes as soon as February 10th. Let's start tonight with Aaron Navarro at the White House. Aaron, the meeting, as I understand it, between President Trump and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has begun. There is lots for those two leaders to talk about.
Major, that's correct. While he was signing executive orders earlier this afternoon, President Trump said that he is there to just, quote, listen to what the Israeli Prime Minister has to say. But officials have told CBS News throughout the day that the hostage deal, as well as the ceasefire agreement between Israel and Hamas, is front of mind, especially when it comes to getting to phase 2. You have heard Trump in recent days seem a bit wishy-washy on if he thinks the ceasefire will hold. His special envoy to the Middle East, Steve Witkoff, told reporters that he is, quote, hopeful that it will remain, but certainly a lot to work out in that phase 2 of the ceasefire agreement.
Quite separate from the phase 2 part of the ceasefire agreement, in which there is a lot yet to be done, and there are still hostages yet to be released and a schedule that needs to be followed there. President Trump also made some rather stark comments today in the Oval Office about Gaza and the future of those who currently call that home. Let's listen to the president.
I think they'd love to leave Gaza if they had an option. Right now, they don't have an option. What are they going to do? They have to go back to Gaza. But what is Gaza? There's practically not a building standing, and they're very dangerous. You know, those buildings are shifting, and they're falling down all over the place, and there's gunfire all over. It's going to be that way for a while.
Aaron, as you well know, this is an issue that will be not only relevant to Palestinians in Gaza, the Israeli government, but the governments in Jordan and Egypt. The president implied that Palestinians now in Gaza could and should go to either Jordan or Egypt. But as I understand it, both those countries have said, no, that's not going to happen.
And Trump was asked about their rejection of that idea in the Oval Office. He pointed to Venezuela eventually, after initially being combative, accepting undocumented migrants deported outside of the U.S. Another striking comment that he made, and an idea he suggested, is not only creating one, quote, big, beautiful land in Gaza, but other places in Jordan and Egypt for Palestinians to go to permanently. Again, he has talked a lot about rebuilding Gaza, saying that it's, quote, demolition site, saying that there is wealth in the area to help build up that land that has been decimated by Israeli strikes. But he also seemed to float potentially Palestinians being moved permanently to other countries, which, as you mentioned, we have not heard those leaders say they would accept that kind of movement.
But briefly, Aaron, some members of Benjamin Netanyahu's coalition government have talked about that, and it sounds as if the president is leaning in their direction.
Yeah, and his special envoy, Steve Witkoff, when asked about this idea of moving Gazans out while they rebuild the land, said that they will be leaning on Israel throughout this process. So certainly a lot of things to watch in the next couple of weeks.
Aaron Navarro on the White House lawn for us. Thank you very much. Scott McFarland joins me here at the table. Scott, talk to us about this matter dealing with FBI agents, the request for their names, a lawsuit filed. What are the stakes?
Two different lawsuits by two different groups of FBI employees and agents, all of whom have asked for anonymity, and we'll explain why in a moment.
Sure.
They're arguing that this list that was compiled by the FBI leadership and handed over as required to the Department of Justice's interim leadership today is a violation of their privacy. It's a violation of their rights. What's more, they say it's a national security threat. Should the information fall into the wrong hands, the national security of the U.S. would be severely compromised. They're also arguing, Major, that they themselves are going to be compromised if somehow this list of agents and employees who worked on the January 6th cases gets out there to the January 6th sympathizers and rioters. There have already been a menacing of FBI agents, those who are known, those who testified in open court. If you open it up to the 5,000 or so who are estimated to be on this list, you're opening up far more people and their families to potential threats. And all of this feels particularly poignant at this moment, where you're coming 2 weeks off the pardons and you have a galvanized group of Americans who think those January 6 rioters were righteous and the FBI, even though nobody has questioned their work on these cases, was wrong.
If I understand this, Scott, we're talking about, in many cases, field agents who are assigned to cases. That's an assignment process that they don't have a lot of wiggle room within. They can't say, no, boss, I'd really rather not do that, and retain their job in good standing with the FBI. That's one issue. They're assigned to do the work, they do the work. They're now possibly being identified and now fear that they could be menaced by fellow Americans. The sort of cancer about January 6th is now going to a completely different level.
It's metastasized. I think it's clear. I think this is happening in a way that even some people inside the Bureau didn't expect, that there would be a naming of names or a listing of identities. Our best reporting at this moment is that the list that was provided to the Department of Justice is acting leadership, Trump-aligned acting leadership. You'll recall the person who ordered this at the Department of Justice is Trump's old defense lawyer from Manhattan. There's a concern here that the list that was provided will identify the employees, even if the names aren't specifically included. There's employee ID numbers, where you worked, when you last worked on a January 6th case. Could be easy for anybody who wants to at the Department of Justice to figure out exactly who is who on this list. May make it more difficult to leak, but not impossible.
And is there some fear or apprehension that these FBI agents or the unions that represent them have that these jobs could, in some later iteration of this, be in jeopardy? Meaning, it's not just about their identities, it's about they could lose their jobs through no fault of their own.
That's where we thought this was headed. There's concern articulated in the lawsuits that they think there's going to be a wave of forced retirements, resignations, or firings. The FBI agents who've sued predicted it. And in the letter that mandated the FBI do this from the Department of Justice, they said one of the reasons they want these names is for potential future employment actions, which is a wonderful way of saying possible firings, forced resignations. We thought the lawsuits were going to head in that direction, but what they seem to argue most vociferously is we think there's a safety issue here for these men and women, that their lives are in jeopardy.
And just to reiterate, Scott, not only did they not have discretion, they had to take the assignments given, they do other things than these cases. They do other work, which could also be jeopardized if they're suddenly run out of the FBI.
A lot of the agents who are detailed to this are on joint terrorism task forces. Perhaps they were well situated for this type of work. If you start gutting FBI agents out of field offices, you are gutting terror task forces, child trafficking units, gun units, violent crime units. But also, if you're sending a message here, I think the concern for the people I spoke to today who are in the thick of this is you have sent a message whether there's firings or not. Be careful what cases you take. Don't take up cases that displease Trump. That is a chilling effect that could resonate for quite some time.
And this also strikes me, Scott, as different than the campaign rhetoric. The campaign rhetoric was there's something wrong at the top of the FBI. Most FBI agents are fine. This action suggests this Justice Department, newly constituted under President Trump, doesn't actually believe that.
I think this is larger in scope than the scrutiny the FBI was expecting over January 6th.
Or that the campaign rhetoric suggested.
And same with the pardons. There was more pardons than people thought the campaign rhetoric suggested. This is a whole of FBI concern because this is every field office across America, nearly every state in America.
Scott McFarland, thank you very much, sir. I appreciate it. As President Trump and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu meet right now in Washington, the Israeli leader is facing, it's fair to say, some political pressure within his coalition government. More on that next. You're watching America Decides. Welcome back to America Decides. As we mentioned at the top of the show, President Trump and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu are at this very moment meeting at the White House. We might see them before reporters maybe in the next 30 minutes or so. When that happens, we'll take you there. Before that, have a conversation about the political pressures and the opportunities in the region that are around this conversation and what Israel and the United States and other nations in the region might agree to. To help us do that, I want to bring in Elise Labette. She is the Edward R. Murrow Press Fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations, also writes the Cosmopolitics newsletter on Substack. Elise, it's great to have you with us. In one of your most recent pieces, you said that President Trump, while supportive of the Netanyahu government, is demanding results, and Netanyahu, in your words, must choose between political survival and a historic legacy of regional peace. Put those two things on the table for us.
Well, I mean, as you know, Major, Prime Minister Netanyahu has spent the better part of a year avoiding the ceasefire deal and the choices that he's faced with right now, to the dismay of many of the hostage families and as well as many in the Israeli public. They've wanted him to make a deal. They've wanted to get those hostages home. And, you know, his far right-wing coalitions, particularly Ben Gvir and Smotrich, some of the most hardline right members of his coalition have said they'd leave the coalition if he went ahead. Now, Netanyahu did go ahead with this first phase of the deal, but the second phase of the deal is even trickier. And certainly it looks like if he were to go ahead, that his coalition will fall. But on the other hand, you do see with the amazing results that Israel itself has really extracted from the region, the weakening of Iran, the weakening of Hezbollah, of Hamas during the course of the war, the new opportunity in Syria with the fall of Bashar al-Assad. There's a new region. There's a kind of a new tectonic shifts that are shaping the region. And that's why President Trump thinks there is an opportunity to move ahead if there would be a Saudi normalization deal that the two men will be discussing today. There could be a chance for normalization between Israel and its Arab neighbors. And Benjamin Netanyahu really has to choose. Is he going to be the person that, you know, delivers peace to the region and perhaps a Palestinian state and lose his coalition? Or is he going to stay in the coalition and, you know, irk not only President Trump, but the Israelis themselves? Recent polling suggests that 60% of Israelis at least favor President Trump's attempts to get a deal done.
Elise, I know you listened closely to the president today talk at length about a big, beautiful piece of land somewhere, either Jordan or Egypt, where all the Palestinians who are in Gaza now could and should go if they had another option. Evaluate that in the context of what you just laid before the audience.
Well, Major, in theory, right, Gaza is uninhabitable right now. I mean, you see the destruction, you know, cameras have been following what's going on. But now that the Israelis are pulling out, we're going to really see the damage that's been done. And, you know, his envoy, Steve Witkoff, said if any of a U.S. state was being destroyed like that, we would see that it's uninhabitable. So that is true. But at the same time, Palestinians remember when they were pushed out of their land decades ago, which they called the Nakba, and they don't want to see that happen again. So Palestinians have right to fear that if they leave their land and would go to Egypt and Jordan, even if Egypt and Jordan would accept them, which they would not, which they have said that they would not, they have no guarantee of coming back. And it doesn't, you know, President Trump is not really clear about what he's saying. Is he saying, I'm going to ask Egypt and Jordan to go to the Sinai or to the Jordan Valley temporarily and build shelters for them so that they could come back to a big, beautiful Gaza with the condos and what everybody is talking about. He's not saying that. So between the lines, the Palestinians are fearing that if they were to leave, then the Israelis would take the land permanently. And I think that's where the rub is. I think we really have to hear more clarity from President Trump about what he's talking about. But that said, and we did hear that, the King of Jordan, King Abdullah, will be coming next week, and he's going to voice strong opposition to President Trump's plan. I'm fairly sure from talking to diplomats and others in the region that Egypt and Jordan would not take Palestinians because Palestinians themselves don't want to leave. And really, there's nothing that President Trump can do to force them.
And to your point a moment ago, mentioning the interest that Saudi Arabia has, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, if there's this whole mass migration and there is no Palestinian state, by definition, if they're going to Egypt and Jordan, with a justifiable fear that that's permanent because that's what's happened to every Palestinian who's gone to Jordan or Egypt, they haven't come back, haven't been welcomed back, then there's no Palestinian state. It would be hard to imagine a scenario in which the Saudis would say, yes, that's the perfect opportunity to normalize relations with Israel.
Look, I think Mohammed bin Salman has come a long way in terms of his willingness to get a deal with Israel, and he is willing to make some compromises on what the future Palestinian state would look like. But certainly he's not going to take a deal with Israel on these conditions, and that's why I go back to the idea that Prime Minister Netanyahu is going to have to make some very tough decisions about what he wants. Does he want peace with the region? Does he want Israel's integration in the region, including Saudi Arabia, which is not just about national security and all of that. It's also about economic integration. The Middle East could really become a center of the global economy if there were to be a deal. Or does he want to hold on to this fantasy that Israeli settlers are going to live by the sea in Gaza? I think that that's not going to happen, and it's just furthering his alienation from the international community. Again, I think it would damage his relationship with Trump, and certainly no deal would be with Saudi Arabia on the cards.
Very well stated. Elise Labott, thank you very much for your time and expertise. Appreciate it. July 9th, 1996. Now, to you, that might feel like something approximating an eternity ago in politics, either international or American. But that was the day Benjamin Netanyahu first came to the White House as Prime Minister of Israel. He was hosted by then President Bill Clinton. In the almost 29 years since, Netanyahu has served as Prime Minister of Israel for 17 of those 29 years. And here are just some of his most notable White House moments.
We've been greatly assisted by President Clinton and his staff in resuming the negotiations with the Palestinians. It's not an easy road ahead, but it's one we're committed to.
Obviously, there are some differences between us in the precise formulations and language, and that's going to happen between friends.
You have the key to the hearts of the people of Israel because of all the great things you've done. From a proud Jewish Zionist to a proud Irish-American Zionist, I want to thank you for 50 years of public service.
We'll walk down memory lane. Two of President Trump's high-visibility cabinet picks today moved closer to a full Senate confirmation vote. We're tracking that and the latest from Capitol Hill. We'll get an update next, right here on America Decides. Welcome back. It's great to have you with us. The Senate will, probably by the end of this week, vote on confirmations of Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and Tulsi Gabbard. This after two separate Senate panels on party line votes voted to send their nominations to the floor for full consideration. Torian Small is on Capitol Hill and joins us. The big question this morning, Torian, as you well know, was what would Bill Cassidy, Republican senator from Louisiana, do about the RFK Jr. nomination question in committee? He went to the Senate floor after voting to move that nomination forward and gave a speech outlining some of the reasons he's now backing RFK Jr. after raising several questions bordering on concerns. Let's take a quick listen.
Mr. Kennedy and the administration committed that he and I would have an unprecedentedly close collaborative working relationship if he is confirmed. We will meet or speak multiple times a month. This collaboration will allow us to work well together and therefore to be more effective.
Torian, what also did Senator Cassidy say about this decision and why he feels comfortable making it?
Well, Major, what's fascinating about the timeline of this storyline with Cassidy, the will he, won't he, the idea behind voting for RFK was something that he struggled with, as he said during that confirmation hearing, because he is a medical doctor. He took pause with the fact that Kennedy has previously bashed the American healthcare system associated with the anti-vax community and has gone on to bash the American healthcare system. What we've seen, though, in the coming days or the days since that hearing was Cassidy come out saying that it took the counsel of J.D. Vance, the vice president, the White House, and several what he's calling very intense conversations with Robert F. Kennedy Jr. for him to come to this decision. He feels that he made this decision based on the concessions that the several parties made, and he feels that they'll have an open line of communication moving forward to help alleviate some of those concerns. I should also mention, though, that he's a two-term senator up for re-election in 2026. He had faced quite a bit of public pressure, not just from those in Trump's orbit, but other Republicans. Clay Higgins, a Republican from Louisiana, his home state, posted on social media that RFK Jr., in his words, will be the head of HHS, whether he likes it or not. So vote with his conscience or not, this is going to happen, and we will be watching. Those are his words. So these very public threats of sorts to his seat come 2026 could be a reason why. We asked him about that, if that was a part of his thought process. He said that that wasn't the case, Major.
Torian, catch us up on Tulsi Gabbard and what happened today.
Yeah, so we saw the Intel Committee vote her out of committee down seemingly party line. It was a 9-8 vote. That committee is split with Republicans having the majority, the slight majority there. We were watching Senator Todd Young, who had previously expressed reservations about her nomination. He had some questions about her allegiance, her association with dictators like Assad al-Bashar of Syria, now ousted leader there, and her previous criticism of the American intel community. We also know that Susan Collins was another person to watch on that panel. Ultimately, though, Young and Collins came to the decision before this vote that they were going to support her, and that's ultimately what we saw happen here.
Torian Small on Capitol Hill, thank you very, very much. So, as we just covered, despite his concerns, Republican Senator Bill Cassidy has decided, and did so today in full public view, then gave a long speech about it, to support Robert F. Kennedy Jr. to be President Trump's next Secretary of Health and Human Services. The question, what changed? Was it just politics or some set of concessions or understandings? We'll bring it up with our reporter panel next, right here on America Decides.
Do senators want their legacy to include disregarding basic health science and instead elevate conspiracy theorists?
That's Democratic Senator Ron Wyden of Oregon fulfilling one constant of confirmation matters. What is that constant? If you're the opposition party, you ask questions. If you're the majority party, you make confirmation votes on behalf of your president. And that's what's going on. That's what's been going on for the last couple of weeks, and that looks to be the path we're on for the remainder of this week and into next week. Specifically, Ron Wyden was asking that question about RFK Jr. His nomination is now moving later this week to a full Senate vote, as we've talked. I want to bring in Finn Gomez and Caitlin Huey-Burns. Caitlin's on the Hill. Finn is right here next to me. Finn, one thing I want to talk to you about. Yeah. In the RFK Jr., Bill Cassidy made reference to this. In previous, thought to be slightly jeopardized Trump nominees, one name keeps coming up. J.D. Vance was really important. I talked to the vice president about this. The vice president and I had several meetings about this. It becomes somewhat clear that J.D. Vance is trying to carve out a role as, if not the enforcer for President Trump in the Senate conference room, certainly the head of legislative affairs.
No, absolutely. I mean, I think when we have reported, CBS News has reported that J.D. Vance will have this prominent role, really a liaison, really a hammer, if you will, at times for the president with respective lawmakers. And I think you're seeing that impact here, and he is having an effect. I think one thing we saw today is also...
And remind lawmakers of the politics, the underlying grassroots politics about the MAGA movement.
Exactly, and if you don't fall in line, there might be political consequences.
No,
to
there
that
will
decision.
definitely be political consequences.
To put it bluntly, yeah, absolutely.
And this is a big moment for RFK Jr. It's a big moment for this nomination. Cassidy's now on board. It looks like RFK is going to be confirmed.
It looks like and also
unless there is some very big surprise that we don't currently see.
I think the most turbulence we expected was going to be through the committees. Obviously, that didn't really occur. We talked about somehow the Republicans essentially caved in on certain issues there. We'll see what happens in the full Senate, but it does look better, a lot better for both of them.
Caitlin Huey-Burns, I want to bring you in from Capitol Hill because we have from our CBS News colleagues some very, very fresh reporting from two sources that the current deputy administrator of USAID has said that the State Department leadership, which has taken temporary control of that agency, essentially has ordered all employees in other countries doing USAID authorized work to leave by Friday. And if they have not left, they will be brought back by U.S. military transport. You were over at USAID headquarters yesterday. You interacted with several people who work within that agency. Did you have or encounter any fears that this might be the next step of all this?
Yeah, Major, when we were talking to employees, or I should say former employees of USAID yesterday, one who was a contractor noted to me that she was in the middle of approving a shipment related to HIV, addressing the issue of HIV in the country that she was working in. That just goes to show how abruptly things were shut down here and how this is having, real world consequences immediately. And Major, that's important because up here on Capitol Hill, you are hearing from some Republicans talking about the virtues of USAID, talking about the national security implications if anything happens to it. They are raising concern, but they're also applauding the idea of auditing it in some way, looking at cost-cutting measures, looking at ways to reform it. And a lot of this has been conceptual. Well, now you're seeing it not only as a concept, but actually being carried out. And so that kind of conflicts with some of the, support that we've seen from some on Capitol Hill among Republicans for reforming USAID, but also not wanting its mission to cease to exist. There's also a really interesting battle up here on Capitol Hill about the role Congress plays here. And, any sort of movement needs to be approved by Congress, and that's not happening. And so you have, this real world consequence happening here. But I should note that there are Republicans who are trying to thread the needle here, saying, look, we like that Musk is going after government spending, but we also don't want him necessarily to get rid of USAID. So how does that, figure itself out remains an open question.
And to your point, Caitlin, one could imagine a scenario where you can audit, you can look for ways to economize, but not pull everyone out of every country in which some assistance, whether it's related to HIV, whether it's really related to poverty reduction, or other troubled zones of the world in which USAID operates. I believe it's up to 100 countries. You can economize an audit without pulling everyone out from those various missions.
Yeah, and I know we've talked a lot over the course of the past few days about what this aid actually does and who is actually benefiting from it. But there's also a national security element to this as well. Multiple lawmakers up here on Capitol Hill have noted that if the U.S. withdraws here, that opens up a vacuum for China, for Russia, for adversaries to come in and fill that. So that's where you see kind of this crossover support from Republicans here, but notably being cautious, being tepid in their criticisms or concerns about how this is all going down.
Cautious and tepid, Caitlin Huey-Burns says, Finn. Would you suggest or based on our reporting? Would that fit with the overall House and Senate Republican orientation to the Trump agenda thus far?
Yeah, I would. I mean, and to put it, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that, again, their beacon, you know, their compass for their moves, emanates from one place, and that's
even if it means trespassing on congressional powers.
It is. I mean, and you know, and some have been characterizing these moves as unprecedented power grabs of presidential power, and I think, you know, and you are seeing the sort of acquiescence of that on the Hill by some Republicans. But, you know, if you look at the MAGA base and that MAGA echo chamber, you know, Donald Trump Jr., for example, posting repeatedly on social media throughout the day of how great these moves are with USAID, how this is something that they wanted. They see this as a misuse of government funds with a liberal agenda, and I think for them it's a political win.
And they don't see tremendous value in the projection of soft power, which is always the way this agency, which started under President Kennedy, Foreign Assistance Act, 1961, then an executive order created USAID. It has long been thought of as a way for the United States to soften its image and to use humanitarian efforts to improve not only its real-world consequences, alleviating poverty, HIV, things like that, but also burnishing its image.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you look at some of the State Department numbers, they say 20.6 million people's lives have been saved since the advent of PEMFAR, for example. You know, I mean,
under George W. Bush,
yes,
right?
Under George W. One of his marquee, you know, accomplishments. But I spoke to a senior USAID source repeatedly since this began, and these folks are just absolutely decimated. I mean, they're demoralized, and they feel that what they do on a daily basis is to do that, to save lives. And this impact,
in sometimes very risky places.
Very risky, risking their own lives to save others. I mean, for them, they're being selfless.
Okay.
They're being led by purpose. So I think, you know, you're seeing just it's just an unprecedented territory where you are right now.
Ben Gomez, Caitlin Huey-Burns, thank you both very much. Still to come, how the Quakers are standing up to immigration enforcement actions that might encroach on churches, schools, and other so-called sensitive locations. That's next. You're watching America Decides. Welcome back. Thanks for being with us. As we mentioned at the top of the show and a couple of times since, we are still awaiting press conference at the White House. President Trump, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. That was, we were told, maybe 5:45 Eastern Time, but the Trump White House has a kind of fluid relationship to scheduling and timing. So when that happens, I promise we will take you to the White House. The shot of that has just come up. So when that happens, we'll take you there. In the meantime, the Trump administration, as you have probably seen or read, is facing a range of legal challenges over many of President Trump's executive orders and actions. Among them, a lawsuit filed by Quaker groups challenging the administration's decision to revoke a longstanding policy, it goes back to the 1990s, that prohibited immigration officials from making arrests or investigations inside locations like schools, hospitals, and places of worship. Nora Merrill is the General Secretary for the New England Quakers, which is one of the plaintiffs in this lawsuit. Noah, thank you for being with us. I appreciate your time. Explain the point of this lawsuit and why your organization joined in it.
Well, from our beginnings in 1661, our faith community has known the importance of religious freedom, both the persecution of our spiritual ancestors and care for the persecution or the right to religious freedom of all people. And so when we heard about the rescinding of the guidelines that prevented the enforcement of immigration in congregations and in other sensitive areas like schools and hospitals, we were deeply concerned. We began to hear from our own members and from others about the potential impact and now, of course, the impact that this change is having.
And Noah, for those in the audience who might say, well, okay, I understand religious liberties for citizens of this country, but are you arguing that those apply universally to anyone who's in this country, regardless of their legal status?
Well, certainly we would believe as a spiritual matter that the right to freedom of conscience and worship is a universal right given by God to all people. But this lawsuit is about more than only people who might be undocumented. It's also about people who might be here legally or who, for whatever reason, might be mistaken for undocumented people. We've already seen that happening. We've seen people unwilling or afraid to come to our worship, to participate in our communities. And it's also about all of us. At the heart of Quaker faith, and I know that this is true for many other Christian groups and religious communities, is this commitment, this understanding that freedom of religion is not just a matter of private belief. There is no real freedom of religion if people are not allowed to gather and engage in a communal practice of worship. And so our claim is not simply on behalf of people who might be subject to enforcement activities or deportation, but on behalf of all people. Who are all of God's people, and the effect that it has on all of our communities, whether it's in the United States or across the globe. But particularly this case relates to freedom of religion in the United States.
And Noah, to the degree you're aware of it, how broad within the religious community in this country is this conversation about this atmosphere of anxiety you just described, and how many other groups, non-Quakers, should be involved in this particular cause of action?
I think it's very broad. Certainly since the lawsuit was filed and since it became public, we've heard from countless groups across the country, both Quakers expressing support and people of many faiths, our brothers and sisters in the Christian church, and people of all faiths expressing their distress, their concern, and their real experience of the impact this is having. Just earlier this week, I heard from a congregation that's a part of our region in New England, in the northeastern U.S., a church they have been partnering in relationship with for 25 years. The pastor of that church sent a heartbreaking email where he was describing that this is a church with roots in the Haitian community. 2/3 of their attenders did not participate in worship immediately after this guidance was rescinded. So we're not talking about something that's only theoretical. We're talking about something that's already happening now. And I'm sure that you've reported on things like the raid that happened in Atlanta, where a man was actually taken from a religious worship service going on, even though he had complied with all of his legal requirements, checking in with ICE, et cetera, and had no criminal background. So it's a real issue for so many of us around the country.
Noah, at the top, in one of your first answers, you mentioned the history of the Quakers. And if I remember the history of our country properly, in Pennsylvania, among the first concentrated abolitionist voices in this new land were Quakers. Do you see this legal action as a continuation of that not only religious point of view, but humanistic point of view?
We believe that any action we take should be an outgrowth of our spiritual life. And so while sometimes that may place us in positions of controversy, we're seeking to be faithful to God as we understand God. These are turbulent times, and we understand that there's something vital for all of us, whether people are faith or not, to be called back in the midst of all of this chaos to what is most important, to something more than ourselves, and to shared values of mercy and compassion, commitment to freedom of conscience and religion. When the world is coming apart, what could be more important than any of us having the opportunity to gather with those with whom we share our most deeply held beliefs, and to share in that worship and find our way in these times?
Noah Merrill, I appreciate the time very much, sir. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having us on.
You're looking at the White House. It's a live picture as we await the press conference. Well, that's the White House. There's a picture inside which we may bring up or we may not. There it is. You see the flags? One American, one Israeli. That's indicating who the principals will be, which we've gone over several times. Let me repeat them again. President Trump, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. When that starts, we'll take you there. In the meantime, please stay tuned for the remainder of America Decides, which will come to your way next. Welcome back. You know the subplot of today's show has sort of been waiting on the press conference. Lots of interesting news, lots of interesting conversation, but still waiting at the White House. President Trump, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. When they come out, we'll go there. In the meantime, I want to bring back Finn Gomez, our political director. Finn, let's talk about this meeting. The shorthand is Bibi gets whatever he wants. That's the short name for Benjamin Netanyahu. He embraces it. Bibi gets whatever he wants from Trump. Maybe not this time. Trump wants to make a big deal. He wants a Trumpian legacy all over the Middle East, and he sees an opportunity, even if that means telling Benjamin Netanyahu, hey, make some decisions that are uncomfortable for you.
Yeah, it's been, and I think the Gaza has permeated throughout the start of his administration, right? This has been, the
transition work with the Biden administration
right before the inauguration day. So this is key and huge for his first 100 days here by setting the tone, leaving a stamp,
and maybe setting something in motion that's big and visionary.
Right. I mean, you can go back to the Abraham Accords from his first term.
Off that.
Yeah, he could build off that. He also, I mean, as you know, Major, he also stoked some controversy today by essentially saying
much so.
It's more than suggesting that the people in Gaza could be displaced, right? To leave that.
And those who are most vociferous supporting Palestinians would basically say you're talking about ethnic cleansing. You're talking about removing an entire population from a place they have called and resided in as their home for decades.
And it's not a topic that is new, right? This is something that's come back and it's reared its head, and there's been a lot of controversy over it. He has said, look, they can, these 2.2 million, there's 2.2 million Palestinians in here, but it's also that they could go potentially to Jordan or Egypt, or, other neighboring countries. Both those countries have said no. They haven't agreed to that. So
the Jordanian foreign minister is on record saying Jordan is for Jordanians, Palestine is for Palestinians.
Right.
That's pretty declarative.
It is very declarative. So, I mean, let's see what happens here. Let's see what how let's play this tape through with this and see if there's any real substance to it. But already in the Arab world,
everyone is going to be waiting to hear what Prime Minister Netanyahu says about that, because that question's going to come up. You were just in Panama.
I was.
Tell me what you learned.
Look, what I learned, and I was there with our colleague Ed O'Keefe for the Secretary Rubio's first trip, official trip in that position, and he's still there in Central America, Latin America. I think it shows a couple things to me. One is that the administration does consider the Chinese influence, both economically and politically, in that part of the world as a real threat. They do. That's the main reason they're there. That's why, Panama, the Panama Canal being, of course.
And what we're talking about, essentially, the trigger point for President Trump, as I understand it, is a Hong Kong company has operational influence, if not control, over both ends of the canal.
That's right.
It's not like they're running Panama or they own the parliament or anything like that, but it's the canal and the ways you get in and out.
Right, and it shows also, it does show that either through, and it's Hutchinson's company, by the way, that does run those. We were there. We got some video of that, and then they're constructing a new bridge. So they're there. The Chinese influence is there, and this is basically either through cajoling or coercion. The Trump administration is trying to set the tone here and leave the flag, be it the American flag, saying that we are here, and talking to these stakeholders and saying, please abide with us, or we may have some other actions that we're going to take here.
When you were there, was there any conversation of, well, why doesn't an American company just outbid the Hong Kong company and do what they're doing?
There was some talk of that. There's also some talk from the Panamanian president saying, hey, we have sovereignty here. But at the same time, they also left an accord they had with the Chinese, an initiative they had with the Chinese because of Rubio's visit. But what you are seeing, though, is that it's significant there. He went to El Salvador. He was there. He made a lot of news there. There's news about using this new Salvadoran supermax prison, essentially, to host some of the migrants that are coming.
And even possibly American
citizens. They said that. I don't know about the legality of that, but that is stunning. I mean, Austin, today was the first day we saw Guantanamo Bay flights back with migrants on them as well. I think it is clear to me that Latin America matters. It matters more than ever before.
Ben Gomez, thanks very much. I appreciate it. That does it for today. We'll be back with another edition of America Decides tomorrow at 5 p.m. Eastern. The Daily Report, that starts right now.